Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is, and welcome. I'm Larry Erickson. This is the Erickson Report. And it's going to be a little bit different this week for reasons which will become clear momentarily. The reason the show is late is because I had a bolt from the blue, or it was actually a bolt from a dark and stormy night, so either cliche works. But I get hit by lightning. And it blew out my modem, it damaged my landline, it messed up some other stuff, had something that was supposed to be a surge protector. It didn't help much. But the result is that I was offline, out of touch with any, all the news sources and whatnot that I usually do to gather and prepare for a show. I couldn't do. Which raises the other thing, is that I've always admired those people. You probably could tell my show is scripted. I mean, there are papers on the desk in front of me. Most TV shows are. But it is scripted. But I've always admired those people who could just kind of sit down, maybe with a couple of notes, or maybe not even notes, and just wing it. Just do it. Just wing it. I'm not good at that. I want to be prepared, partly because I want to make sure that I have the facts right, have the figures right and all that, and I've decided what I want to talk about, and I'm trying to fit it into a specific time frame, which is an advantage some other folks don't. Those folks who, for example, do podcasts, or they do a show on YouTube or something, they can just do the show as long as it takes to cover whatever they want to cover. It doesn't have to fit a certain time frame. But again, even so, I've always admired people who could just do that. So this time I'm sort of doing it. I've got some stuff here, but basically I've got notes so that I have the facts and figures right. And we're going to see how this goes. It may turn out to be okay. It may turn out to be something I never, ever want to talk about again. I will tell you that if you're seeing the show either on my blog or on YouTube, you can check there's going to be some links to some things that you might want to look at. But before I forget though, let me do this before I even get to that. Something from the last show, which seems like an eternity ago now. I was talking about the confirmation of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. And apparently somewhere in there, I called her Ketanji Jackson Brown. Now, Jackson Brown is a very fine singer, a very good performer, but he's not a Supreme Court nominee. So my apologies for that screw up. In any event, what I was starting to talk about before I changed my subject there, something I'll have a link to information about, something I did a month ago about the case of Julian Assange. I mention this again here, however, because it just happened the other day that the court in the United Kingdom approved his extradition to the United States. The matter now goes to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, who's expected to approve it. It would be really a surprise if she didn't approve it, after which the only possible appeal is a quick appeal that says, did she follow proper procedure in the way she made the order? The point is, Julian Assange is very close to just being, basically packed in a box and shipped to the United States, where he faced charges of espionage for publishing classified information under the 1913 Espionage Act, faces 175 years in prison. Now, this case has been very little noted among the mass media in the United States, which is surprising because of the threat that a successful prosecution would present to the way a lot of papers routinely do their business. And outfits like the Freedom of the Press Foundation, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, and other press freedom foundations have all been calling for these charges to be dropped for just that reason. But the reason I bring it up now, the other point, is that some parts of the left have reacted with glee, like rubbing their hands glee over the prospect of Julian Assange being brought to the United States in legal terms, in chains, and possibly being thrown into prison for decades upon decades. because they regard him as having committed the unforgivable sin of having embarrassed Hillary Clinton in 2016 by releasing some of Clinton's emails that showed she and the DNC conspired to interfere with Bernie Sanders' campaign during the primaries. But embarrassing a Democratic candidate, in the presidential race, they blamed Tweety Pie on Julian Assange. And so they're literally rubbing, and I'm looking right at you, Daily Kos, rubbing their hands with glee over the prospect of undermining press freedom in order to get back at somebody that criticized Hillary Clinton. That's pretty shameful. Again, you can see there'll be a link to my previous story on this at the description. Next thing I wanted to mention, just so that you're aware of it, mention it very quickly. There is a move on for a constitutional convention, to call a constitutional convention in the United States. If 34 states call for a convention, then such a convention will happen. 27 states have already said yes to this. So they only need 7 more. The claim for this is that it'll be about a balanced budget amendment. That'll have an amendment to the Constitution requiring the federal government to have a balanced budget every year. However, the Constitution provides no guide rails, no guardrails for such a convention. It can, once it opens, it can do whatever it wants. It can completely rewrite the Constitution, totally. In fact, one far-right activist, a guy named Mark Meckler, is one of the people pushing this. He's one of the people behind this move for a constitutional convention. And he said his goal, that the convention is, quote, intended, this is his goal, intended to reverse 115 years of progressivism. His goal is basically to undo every bit of social and legal progress in the last 115 years, by his own words. You go to defendourconstitution.org, just the way it's spelled, just the way it sounds, to see what your state has done about this, if they call for a convention or not. If they have, tell them to change their minds, change it back. If they haven't, tell them don't do it. Okay? So with that, moving on. There is some good news. I want to offer you a bit of good news. The new federal budget proposed by the Biden administration does not include the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment, it's named for Henry Hyde, is a right-wing Congress critter from Illinois. And this was first passed in 1976, just 3 years after Roe v. Wade. And because Hyde said, okay, we can't ban abortions under federal law, but we can prevent any federal support for this. So under the Hyde Amendment, the government cannot use any funds from Medicaid, Medicare, or the Children's Health Insurance Program, known as CHIP, for any kind of abortion or abortion services, for any coverage. It's been in the federal budget every single year since 1976. Last year, Biden did not include it in his proposed budget, but it got stuck back in. This year, it's not in it again, and the hope is that this time, with the increased attention being paid to the possibility of Roe being overturned, that it'll be able to stay in this time. And the fact is, we need that good news because there is so much bad news on this matter. The Guttmacher Institute, which keeps track of such things, said that 2021 was the worst year for abortion rights in almost half a century. Okay, basically essentially the worst year for abortion rights pretty much since Roe. Under Roe, a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion in the first trimester, and with some restrictions in the second. That was sort of codified, reaffirmed and codified in the 1976 case, Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which actually set the 24-week standard, now commonly referred to, with the idea that before 24 weeks is about the time when a fetus becomes viable, when it is able to survive outside the mother's womb. And essentially the idea is that before viability, the state simply does not have a compelling interest in protecting that fetus. After viability, you can say it has some. So the thing is that that 24-week standard has been the standard, the constitutional standard, for 30 years. But in the next 2 months, the Supreme Court is expected to rule on a case called Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, where they're expected to uphold, this is what's expected, to uphold a Mississippi law that has a 15-week limit on a right to an abortion. That, you notice, that's 9 weeks short of viability, so that would, in fact, do that. I have to ask my camera, is that till break?
10 minutes in.
That's 10 minutes in, all right. By the way, since this is not timed, I don't know exactly how much more time I have, so I have to be told. So, any event, the court is expected to uphold the Mississippi ban of 15 weeks, which would, frankly, I expect them to do it while claiming that they're not actually overturning Roe and Casey. Because when they're at the confirmation hearings, they insisted that viability was that precedent was so vitally important to their very souls that they'll try to claim they're not actually overturning them, even though by undermining the 24-week standard, they are. The Guttmacher Institute says that 26 states are certain or very likely to ban abortion if Roe disappears. 21 are certain, 5 are likely. In fact, as of now, 23 states already have laws on the books that would clamp down on abortion access. On the other hand, 16 states have laws that are expected to protect such access. Colorado, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, passed one that basically says that the law that was under Roe and Casey, that's law in Colorado, so that would continue regardless of what the Supreme Court does. Oregon, for their part, just approved a $15 million fund called the Oregon Reproductive Health Equity Fund to help women who need abortions. This is specifically geared to women from out of state, because several states are actually not just trying to ban abortion, they're trying to make it illegal for women in those states to go to a state where it is legal to get an abortion. So Oregon is looking to help those people. There actually is some pushback against those kind of laws. Connecticut has done this. This should be a model for every other state. They passed a bill that would bar state courts and state agencies from in any way participating in the enforcement of these out-of-state abortion laws. What's more, it allows anybody who is sued in one of those other states for abortions that are performed and legal in Connecticut to countersue. So this is intended, this is pushing back against these out-of-state bans. Now the thing is, suppose, as expected, that the Supreme Court overturns Roe, that the Supreme Court strikes it down. Do not think that these right-wingers will stop if they succeed in largely banning abortion. Do not think for a moment that they will not move on to birth control. In fact, they already have. There were already restrictions, there were already exemptions in Obamacare about organizations that don't have to provide any coverage for reproductive or birth control services under the insurance of their employers. There's already carve-outs. And there are GOPR candidates and actually GOPR members of Congress, Senator Marsha Blackburn in particular, who are already saying that Griswold v. Connecticut was constitutionally unsound and could be overturned. Griswold v. Connecticut was a 1965 Supreme Court decision that established the right of married couples to obtain and use birth control. It was 7 years later in Eisenstadt v. Baird, it's 1972, that right was extended to unmarried couples. They say this should be overturned. You should be able to ban people from getting birth control. All these things relate to a broader category, that I refer to as bodily autonomy. Just like abortion, about a right to do what's with her body, the right of couples to not get pregnant, bodily autonomy. But it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that to expand to include LGBTQ issues, which is also a matter of bodily autonomy. You being able to be who you are and live as who you are. And And by the way, don't anybody try to jump up and say, well, yeah, what about my bodily autonomy with these vaccine mandates and these mask mandates and all that? I'm sorry, a mandate that has to do with protecting public health during an epidemic, a pandemic, has not a doggone thing to do with you being able to live your own life. You know, we thought some of this was done, but with the increasing awareness of people being gay, people openly gay. It's just no longer that unusual. And it's almost like it's not even a topic anymore. Hey, here's some celebrity. Hey, did you hear? They're gay. The response is usually, oh, yeah, all right. So what? We thought that a lot of this was finally resolved when the Supreme Court, in the classic case Obergefell v. Hodges in 2017, ruled that bans on same-sex marriage were unconstitutional. We thought we'd really reached a landmark there, but the fact is we haven't. And partly because we forget how recent all of this is. Again, that was 2017, but in 1892, now I know that was 130 years ago, but in terms of history, that's not that long. In 1892, being gay was referred to as the love that dare not speak its name, something you couldn't even acknowledge. Sex between men in the United Kingdom was illegal until 1967, and even then it came with restrictions that people still got prosecuted for it. Those restrictions weren't lifted until 2000. The Washington Post says that right now there are at least 166 bills pending in 38 state legislatures that would restrict the rights of LGBTQ plus people. You're probably going to be surprised to learn that most of those are about transgender people. This is after 2021 being the deadliest year for transgender people in history. It also comes at a time when surveys have shown that more than half of transgender male adolescents have attempted suicide. Somewhere between, depending on the survey, 41 to 51% of male transgender students at some point have attempted suicide, and more have actually considered it. And many of these bills that we're talking about actually focus on transgender school athletes, which is, the latest copper hyperventilating, ginned up social panic to keep the rubes off balance and keep them looking the wrong way. But, this kind of panic, by the way, it's not enough. What they've done so far, it's not enough. It's never enough. It just as happened with gays and lesbians, just as happened with same-sex marriage. When same-sex marriage was originally started, now it's just not that big a deal. Society's not falling apart. And so you can't really go around ranting about that. Thing is, the more awareness there is of transgender people, the more the people you're aware of transgender people just existing in society, the less effective just screeching about them becomes. You can keep insisting, keep claiming that transgender people just don't exist, but that has less and less impact as time goes on. And you can't present the very existence of them per se as a threat. So you have to come up with increasingly violent rhetoric, increasingly slimeball tactics, not only like the "don't say gay" bills, using the threat of suits from the ever-looming fanaticism to accomplish with facts and logic what you can't, to establish that way what you can't establish with facts and logic. But for that to work, you have to keep the emotions roiled. You have to keep the adrenaline pumping. You have to up the ante. You have to intensify. You always have to intensify, which is now we have people like Marjorie Taylor, Color of Nausea, saying Brown Jackson is a pedophile, and anyone who supports her for the Supreme Court is a pedophile, and actually said, quote, the whole of, quote, the Democrats, the Disney Corporation, and teachers are all pedophiles and predators. Because you always have to up the ante. You've gone from threatening our children to being an active participant in threatening our children. And I think we've been through this before. This is not the first time we've been through exactly this kind of thing. Back in the 1980s, Allegations of child sexual abuse in daycare centers swept across the country. There are high-profile cases in multiple states. There are claims that the nation was seeing an epidemic of sexual abuse in child care and daycare centers. Parents wound up getting the idea there's a pedophile behind every tree. Allegations that emerged not only of sexual abuse, but of satanic rituals, human sacrifice. Any of you are old enough to remember the McMartin School case? That was out in where was it? Manhattan Beach, California. That dragged on for 6 years, turned into the biggest, most expensive trial in U.S. history to that date. And these allegations persisted against these various places, despite the fact there were no missing people, no bodies that turned up, no evidence to bolster the claims. In Scott County, Minnesota, 22 people arrested on sexual abuse charges after an 11-year-old boy was removed from his home after his parents became a target of the allegations. He was interrogated on a daily basis for 2 months until finally he told the authorities what they wanted to hear. Now, this panic eventually died down, but it still continued to surface occasionally. In the mid-1990s, in a place called Wenatchee, Washington, a police lieutenant, for some reason, became convinced that there was a child sex ring in his town. He eventually filed more than 29,000 counts of child abuse against 43 people, resulting in 18 convictions, nearly all of which were set aside after people spent years in jail. The one-time proprietors of a nursery school in Austin, Texas, have been tried and imprisoned on grounds of claiming that there were mass orgies with small children, Kool-Aid laced with blood, animal dismemberment, flights across the border for rape by Mexican soldiers. They were spent 21 years in jail before they were totally exonerated in 2017. Those of you in Massachusetts might remember the Phil's Acre Daycare Center business. But here's the difference. Here's an important difference. Those were actual social panics. They were panics. They happened because of changes in society, because people not being able to adjust to changes around them. The difference now is that this social panic about pedophiles, about your children under threat, about all of these things being snuck into math textbooks, this is manufactured, this is planned, this is calculated, created panic by people who are desperate to manipulate others and delight in the despair of the desperation of the people they delude. And they do it, they gin up this panic without conscience, without concept of morality, and they do it in the service of power and greed. Don't you ever forget it, that that's what this is about, and don't ever back down. In fact, you want to have some fun? Here's a way to have some fun. If you ever have somebody who comes up to you with one of those, well, you know, there are only two genders kind of things, have some fun. Ask them the question that Brown Jackson was asked at her confirmation hearing. Define a woman. I'll be willing to just virtually guarantee you that if they give you a coherent answer, it will be wrong. Because some of the Gopper senators were asked about, you define, well, you answered the question, and you just said, well, XX chromosomes. Actually, that's wrong. Geneticists, trying to make their divisions the same way that, animal species are divided. You have to decide what animal fits in what category. You have to make decisions about how you divide that up. The actual division is the other way around. It's the presence of a Y chromosome that defines a male, and the absence of one that defines female. But the thing is, we grew up, it was, well, XX is female, XY is male. Fine, except there's a lot more to it than that. There's a lot. I thought called the Focus Foundation came up with this. I mean, besides XX and XY, there is XXY, XYY, XXYY, XXXY, XXXXY, X, XXX, XXXX, and XXXXX. Those ones that have a Y, they're considered male. Those ones that don't, those are considered female. But the point is, you can have two X chromosomes. You can have 3 or 4 X chromosomes, and you're still being male. The whole point is that when a fetus is developing, what it's looking to do in this terms is we reproduce bisexually. So you're trying to create, two sexes so that you can reproduce and help the species go. That's how it works. The key things here are the gonads, which are the males of the testes and the females of the ovaries. But the thing is, XX individuals, defined as women, can have male gonads. XY individuals can have ovaries. One of the things I read about this, there was a case where an older man died, and I don't remember why, but he had an autopsy for some reason. When in the autopsy, they discovered he had a womb. There are people who, if you take a sample from them at one part of their body, it says that they're XX. You check the chromosomes based on another part of their body, and it says they're XY. I don't have enough time to go through all of the genetic that I was going to go through on this, about how this works, and the fact that not only can your gonads, your reproductive organs, not only can they not just be XX or XY, they can actually change when you get older, because once they're set, there's another set of genes that continue them that way, and if those genes stop working, they can change. Now these things are all rare. Yes, they're all rare, but they do happen. The other thing is that the secondary sex characteristics, like, whether you have a penis or a vagina, that's what is usually used to judge when a newborn baby is there. Is this male? We're going to say this is male or female in the birth certificate, because they're not doing genetic tests to discover that. Sometimes it's just not that obvious. It's estimated that 1.7% of the American population is intersex. It's not clear whether they're male or female. It may not sound like a lot, but the fact is that's 1 out of every 60 births. That's millions of people in the United States. And differences in appearance and behavior occur even later in life. What it comes down to is, the way I express it is this. Your sex and gender are not the same thing. Your sex it's physical. It's based on your primary and secondary sexual characteristics, and it's based on genetics. Your gender is who you are. It's nature and nurture. It's body and psychology. It's who you sense yourself to be. It's who you feel yourself. It's who, when you look in the mirror, it's who you think you should see. And if you don't, and you want to live your life the way you feel you should be, rather than the way that it looks in the mirror, then you are transgender. And as one researcher put it, transgender humans represent, I'm quoting here, represent the complexity and diversity that are fundamental features of life, evolution, and nature itself. That is a fact. Transgender is a natural thing. All right, I'm out of time. I got to cut it off there. So I'll just say, see you in 2 weeks. In the meantime, you have the best 2 weeks you possibly can. Please let me know how you think this show went, okay? Please let me know. But for now, as always, peace.